Shock protection boundaries identified as limited approach boundary and restricted approach boundary should be applicable when approaching personnel are exposed to energized electrical conductors or circuit parts. NFPA 70E's tables are used for the distances associated with various AC system voltages. NFPA 70E table 130.40b is actually used for the distances associated with various DC system voltages. The electrical safety program must include a procedure that provides workers with guidance related to required protection when the approach distance is less than the appropriate shock protection boundary. There are two protection boundaries, the limited approach boundary and the restricted approach boundary. Previous versions of the NFPA 70E also included the prohibited approach boundary, but it was removed in the 2015 version of NFPA 70E. The dimension associated with each of these boundaries really depends upon the maximum voltage to which an employee might be exposed. For AC systems, the voltages given in NFPA 70's tables are line-to-line voltages as opposed to line-to-neutral voltages. The limited approach boundary is the closest approach distance for an unqualified employee unless additional protective measures are used. The restricted approach boundary is the closest approach distance for a qualified employee unless additional protective measures are used. The limited approach boundary is an approach limit at a distance from an exposed energized electrical conductor or circuit part within which a shock hazard exists. The limited approach boundary is a shock protection boundary. It's not related to arc flash or incident energy. The arc flash boundary may be greater than, less than, or equal to the limited approach boundary. This boundary defines the approach limit for unqualified employees and is intended to eliminate the risk of contact with an exposed energized electrical conductor or circuit part. When an employee is closer than this minimum distance, special considerations are necessary for protection. Except as specified in 130.2b3, working within a limited approach boundary is only acceptable if an energized work permit has been completed and authorized. If an unqualified employee is required to work within the limited approach boundary, the employee must be directly and continuously supervised by a qualified person. The restricted approach boundary is an approach limit at a distance from an exposed energized electrical conductor or circuit part within which there is an increased likelihood of electrical shock due to electrical arc over combined with inadvertent movement for personnel working in close proximity to the energized electrical conductor or circuit part. This shock protection boundary is the approach limit for qualified employees. The arc flash boundary may be greater than, less than, or equal to the restricted approach boundary. A qualified employee required to cross the restricted approach boundary must be protected from unexpected contact with the conductors or circuit parts that are energized and exposed. Qualified employees should have the knowledge and the ability to avoid unexpected contact with an exposed energized electrical conductor or circuit part. A complete and authorized energized electrical work permit is required, however, before employees are allowed to work within the restricted approach boundary, unless a qualified person is provided with and uses appropriate safe work practices and PPE in accordance with the rules and regulations of NFPA 70E under any of the following conditions. Number 1, testing, troubleshooting, and voltage measuring. Number 2, thermography and visual inspections if the restricted approach boundary is not crossed. Number 3, access to and egress from an electrical area with energized electrical equipment if no electrical work is performed and the restricted approach boundary is not crossed. Number 4, general housekeeping and miscellaneous non-electrical tasks if the restricted approach boundary is not crossed